Hello, welcome, and thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Aaron Diaz, and you're listening to episode number 8 of Live the Good Life from the podcast studios of Aaron's Wine Chronicles corporate headquarters in the heart of Washington wine country. Today, I'm going to be interviewing one of Eastern Washington's best winemakers, and we'll be discussing his unique approach and philosophy to how he makes wine. We'll certainly learn something new about wine, as my guest is also the owner of Bartholomew Winery, located in Kennewick, Washington. Let's welcome to the show, Mr. Bart Fawbush.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Sounds like the audience is really excited about you being here today.
It's the same exact response I get when I come home.
Well, thank you, Bart. Really appreciate you taking time out of your day to come down and join our podcast. Why don't you take just a little bit of time and give us a little background and introduce yourself to the audience for us?
Yeah, so I started making wine in 2007 under Bartholomew Winery. I originally am from Utah, the great state of Utah, and when I went off to college, I went to Gonzaga University. There I studied biology and chemistry and math and all that good stuff. Eventually found my way into the world of finance. And then when I figured out who I was, I came back to wine. And I shouldn't say I came back to wine, but I discovered wine. And so I was able to use the information I learned at college, and I've stayed here in the Pacific Northwest.
So when you say finance, are you talking crypto or?
No, that wasn't around when I was doing that.
Oh, okay.
Mostly did underwriting and mortgages. So I eventually owned my own mortgage company.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. One other thing I want to add before we get too deep into this podcast is that a lot of you good lifers are used to hearing my brother, the co-host, Aaron Diaz, on this show. And actually, he is here. He happens to be sitting just off camera with a glass of wine, scowling at me as if he wants to hit me right in the mouth. But he is here too. So he actually happens to be a club member at Bart's Winery. And he and his wife fell in love with their wines a long time ago when they first started going in. So this is going to be fun. Again, I want to thank you for being here. It's great having you on the show. So we have this tradition here at Aaron's Wine Chronicles where while we're in the studio and we're recording, we always typically enjoy some sort of libation when we're having this discussion. And in this case, we decanted a couple of different wines a couple of hours ago, and then you came in just a few minutes ago, and you tasted both of the wines and decided to go with the cab. One of the wines is a 2014 Garrison Creek Cellars Merlot, and it's sourced from Lake Colleen Vineyard in Walla Walla Valley, AVA. It's located in the foothills of the Blue Mountains. Actually, Power Line Road, State Line Road runs, east and west. And if you're in the tasting room at Garrison Creek Cellars and you look due south, you've got the Blue Mountains right there. So it's just gorgeous. The second wine is a 2016 Seven Hills Winery Cabernet Sauvignon from McClellan Estate Vineyard, also in the Walla Walla Valley AVA. And which one did you choose to drink, Bart?
I ended up with the cab from Seven Hills.
What do you think about that?
A fantastic wine. It's got good mouthfeel, good balance. Tannins are there, fruits there, acids there, nice and bright. Love it.
Adam, I think, is now on. He started out with a cab. You're on the Merlot?
Yeah. Yep.
What do you think?
Love it.
Yeah.
Both
Okay.
are great.
Awesome. Okay. So if you would, let's get this started. Basically, this is just going to be an informal conversation. I'm going to just facilitate this discussion by asking you some questions and getting the ball rolling. But one of the things that I'd like to know from you is, how did you actually get started in the wine industry? What sparked your passion or desire to do what it is that you do now?
Yeah, so as a mortgage broker, I was taking a loan application by phone. And this gentleman told me that he was wondering if he could add his winemaking credentials to the application so he could get better qualified for a mortgage. And through asking him a few questions, we became quick friends. I didn't know much about wine at the time. I've had some bottles, start out with the sweet white stuff and grocery store wine. And one thing led to another. Before the end of the conversation, we were making plans to go to a region in Washington, Woodinville area, to go do a tasting on a real rainy Sunday afternoon.
Wow.
And went over there and decided to enjoy myself and ask lots of questions. And throughout the day, I met amazing winemakers and a lot of times their spouses. And the paradigm to me was starting to shift at that point, trying to figure out, oh, wait a second. So they're in a warehouse. They have a tasting room up front. They source their grapes. I thought you had to have a chateau on the hill, be a third-generation winemaker.
Yeah.
Start with $1 million,
Right. Or
those
more.
kinds of things. Yeah. And so I at that point, I just decided to start going back over there more often, tasting, and kind of fell in love with wine right there.
Wow. So, in your journey to be a winemaker, have you ever gone to the Bordeaux region of France, or gone to Napa and Sonoma and done the tastings there? You know, the Las Vegas of wine.
No,
I mean,
only in my mind.
Really?
And then through the travels you take through tasting a bottle of wine.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, that's it.
Nice. So you bring a fresh, unbiased perspective to what it is that you do. You haven't been tainted by anything, whether it's a positive or a negative taint, right? I mean,
I think so.
I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
you bring a clarity to what you do that's based solely on what's inside you.
It's almost like a true evidentiary, the scientific method.
Yeah.
I have a theory. Let's start working towards that, and let's see if my thoughts or beliefs or what I wrote down is true.
And you did mention that you also have a chemistry background, right?
Yeah, so
At Gonzaga.
I thought I was going to be a doctor at one point. So
Pre-med, right?
Yeah, pre-med. So I figured that I should probably pay attention to the chemistry if I'm going to be cutting people open. So that was kind of my, the motivation behind learning.
Pre-med, winemaker, I don't know. I'd take winemaker every time.
It's a different way of medicating people, that's for sure. Yeah.
So do you have any formal, like education in viticulture, UC Davis or enology or something like that? Is there any formal sort of certification or education that you went and paid for to do what you do?
I was just going to ask, you mean something I paid for? No. I paid for it in sweat and tears. Right. Basically, the fantastic thing about wine is there's so much curiosity, there's so much information, there's so much out there that you can absorb quite a bit by doing and then watching others and then drinking and tasting and then applying those things to your winemaking.
That is exactly the scientific method. I mean,
yeah, pretty
it
much.
really is, right?
Yeah, I joke, and I've had people in my tasting room ask, how do you make wine? And I say, YouTube. And, I get a chuckle and stuff like that. And deep down, I kind of laugh because, honestly, when I first got into business, one of the things you buy is yeast. And on the packet, it had a YouTube link, QR code or whatever it was, and it shows you how to rehydrate the yeast on YouTube. So you go in and, you do this, steps 1, 2, and 3, and then you add it to the wine. So we joke, but the information is out there. And a lot of our vendors put it on YouTube to make it real easy. It's great to not only hear it, but also see it, right? And so that's the power of video.
You have used YouTube at some point in the process to kind of refresh your memory on some sort of protocol that you might use or some methodology that you might apply, right? I mean,
yeah, for sure. YouTube and the internet, obviously, we bring in a lot of different odd varieties, varietals of grapes, and in doing so, how do you find out about them? Well, you taste, you get online, you look at the wiki pages, you do all your research, and you try to figure out how am I going to make this wine and what do I do with it?
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Everybody has their own story, I'm telling you,
Yeah. I guess I'm trying to give everybody hope.
Yeah. Well, you certainly do.
I think you can go out and do whatever it is that you want. I mean, there aren't very many rules. I mean, there are natural laws that you have to follow, fermentation, and it creates alcohol, CO2, all that kind of stuff.
Basically, what you're saying though is that you started with a pedigree of 0 in the wine industry, and you created that pedigree yourself.
Some people say I still have a 0 pedigree.
No. I'm not saying that at all.
No, sure.
Right? You know that both my brother and I really respect what you do behind the scenes, and the quality of your wines is outstanding. We're going to get into that in a little bit, but it's just amazing stuff. So, I mean, over the years, as you've done what you've done in your own way, independently, has there been anybody who has maybe influenced you, or somebody that maybe a winemaker that maybe you look up to, that I mean, maybe they don't do things exactly the way you do, or you don't do things exactly the way they do, but is there somebody out there that maybe had some influence, even if it was indirect influence, to how you do wine?
That's an interesting question. So, coming from the real estate world, mortgage and finance, there was 10 people offering to take my money, to be my coach, to mentor me, to show me how to do what they do. And in the wine business, there's just not that. There's at the university level, and there are some technical groups, which I belong to all of them. You sit around, you can taste wine or drink wine with others and analyze it. Really, there's not a lot of mentorship. It's interesting because I've often thought I would love to coach new winemakers. I just don't know if that's something that needs to be done out there. I know myself, it was really important. The first time I went all the way from grape to bottle, I interned under somebody else, and I just wanted to know everything. So the little details of cleaning the tanks. How do you clean the tanks? How often do you top your barrels? How often are you running your sulfite levels in your chemistry lab? When you do your blending, how do you do your blending trials? Everything, all the way down to the details, and then getting into a bottle. So the first time I helped somebody go from grape to bottle, oh man, it was amazing, because I was like, oh, this is how you do it. And now let's see if I can replicate that. A couple years later, I started, and sure enough, 2007, we started with our first vintage, and we wanted to make enough wine to justify opening a tasting room. And in 2010, we opened a tasting room, and we had that tasting room for 11 years before shutting it down. And but now we've moved across the other side of the state. We have our tasting room on this side of the state. For those of you that are watching this on YouTube, it's through Eastern Washington, Southeastern Washington, close to the Oregon border. I think we're like 25 miles from Oregon.
Yeah,
just north of that. So it's really hot. It's a basin. It's got awesome geography. We're blessed with 3 rivers that come into our area, so there's plenty of irrigation, and we use a little bit for grapes. And we have the opportunity to take in and grow just about anything. And that's what I love about this industry. It's just keeping me interested.
Yeah, you brought up a few things that triggered additional questions that aren't really here on our little draft that we're going through for the questions. And I'm a scientist as well. Almost sensor measurements.
Yeah.
So in a lot of respects, there's an analogy to what I do to when you're doing an assay on your wine must or whatever, and you're grabbing certain metrics to help you understand where you're at in the winemaking process, right?
That's right.
And it's more than just pH. I mean, there's a lot of different things, right? As a chemist, in that that's in your blood too. Do you get OCD about certain metrics sometimes when you're looking at all of these different parameters that you can physically measure at some point during the process?
Obsess about it? No. I think that's what's beautiful about wine, is that every vintage is going to be different. And so you're not going to have the same exact numbers from vintage to vintage.
And I bet you, even if you did, they would taste different. The wines would be different.
Yeah, it's amazing. There's so much complexity in a grape. Yeah,
that's right.
Absolutely. But no, I kind of take each vintage, and when we bring in the grapes, we try to pick the grapes at a certain level. But again, you're taking samples out of a vineyard, you're walking down a row, and let's say you're taking 10 or 15 clusters on an acre. So you hope that you get the numbers in when you crush and stem those grapes, for example, or you press them if they're white wine grapes. You hope that those numbers come in the same as your field samples, but it's not always true. And then the other part of it is just logistics. So let's say I'm out on a Wednesday, and I say, well, gosh, there's probably 2 more days or 3 more days that I'd like to see this hang. And then you talk to the grape grower, since I don't own a vineyard. I talk to the grape grower, hey, when can I get under your schedule? And if they say, well, a week from tomorrow, and so instead of picking it in a couple days, you're another 7-8 days out. And during harvest, when grapes are moving, when I say moving, there's sugars and acids and stuff like that. So you may have gotten it 2 or 3 or 4 days post what you would have liked, and so you got to work with that. Yeah, so you can't obsess about it.
It's not an exact science, right? I mean,
but it's
nature controls a lot of things, right? And timing, and I mean, I don't know if you've gone out to my website on aaronswinechronicles.com, but I have sections there where I've done some research on all those different, not all, but on many, many different parameters. And the more I look at it from a scientific point of view, the more magical winemaking becomes to me, because you're right, nothing is written in stone. And there are so many parameters that play a role in how a wine turns out at the very end that it's almost mind-boggling, that there are people out there who have consistently delicious wines year in and year out, regardless of the parameters, right?
Yeah, well, because 50% of it is sensorial. You mentioned sensory.
Yeah.
Taste the grapes, chew on the seeds,
Right.
chew on the skins separately from the seeds or from the pulp. And, if you're going to do any stem fermentation.
And you make it a point to do that.
You chew the stems.
Yeah.
And you find out how vegetal are they.
Is that how you get your fiber part?
Well, you can. Absolutely.
We take Metamucil, my brother and I, but that's just...
No, enough grape juice will keep you flowing. So, no, but yeah, so half of it is the chemistry, half of it is the sensorial or sensory, and I think that's where I think a really, really good winemaker has that nice blend.
Yeah, you're also an artist. I mean, you're a sensor. Your whole body's a sensor. I mean, whatever. But you're also an artist, and you're kind of melding these two things of.
No, it's true, because you can get
art and
numbers.
science.
Let's say your acid numbers say one thing, but then you take a cluster and you bite into it, and it tastes totally different than what your numbers say. And you say, well, geez, which one is correct here? Is it me, or is it what happened? And so that's where you just question your decisions at that point, and then you make further decisions based off of the actual evidence. And sometimes that is literally by what's in your mouth, what you taste.
Do you make those decisions in a bubble, or do you have other people actually helping you as well, tasting the same things you're tasting? And do you collectively come to some decisions about things, or do you just do this yourself?
I work with some really fantastic, amazing, the best grape growers in the world. I mean, I'm biased. I'm in Washington State,
right.
But it is always fantastic if the grape grower can walk the vines with you and taste while you're tasting. And there's a little collaborative thing going on there where they'll look at you and say, "Hey, what do you think?" And I say, "Well, this is what my opinion is on this." And they say, "Yeah, and the lab numbers say this. Our flavors, our sensorists saying this. Let's pick on such and such time or time frame or date." And then they'll look on their calendar and we schedule it. So I love doing that. I also have an assistant winemaker who is learning the trade too. And so it's awesome when I can bring other people out to get a little bit of collaboration.
Yeah.
Sure, I'm the final arbiter of everything because, I always say, I sign the check on the front, not the back.
Right.
And so you got to make sure that, it's all what I'm looking for, I guess. Yeah. Not to be too about me, but you know what I mean.
No, I understand. Somebody has to be El Jefe,
Yes.
So how many years have you now been making wine in the industry?
Well, 16 vintages now.
16 vintages.
Yeah. I started a little bit before that. I had another project that didn't work out. Someday I'll write a memoir and, we'll talk about, instead of Kitchen Confidential, it'll be Wine Confidential, if you know the reference.
What has been the biggest surprise during that time? What's been the biggest surprise to you?
Oh, that's a good question. I think maybe perhaps that there's an old way of doing things, and so sometimes you're expected to fit into those categories. And
are you talking about old world style winemaking and new world style, or
I'm talking maybe attitudes?
Okay.
Expectations. So, for example, like what kind of grapes do you use? What kind of equipment are you using? There's a lot of different things, and then you're supposed to kind of stay inside of a box, and that's just never worked for me.
But who says that? Who says you're supposed to?
I shouldn't. Yeah, that's a good question.
Is it the Washington Washington?
No, I don't think there's anything.
State Wine Commission.
Maybe it's just more of a feeling.
Right.
I was never told that I had to do anything.
Yeah.
So I didn't. Right. So then that was where I felt free to change things. But I guess it's mostly the what you see in maybe the wine reviewers, what you see written about in the media, what you see on the grocery store shelves, that type of stuff, you're supposed to do X, Y, and Z. And I just realized there was so much more to wine than that. And that's where it kind of took me down a different path.
Yeah.
It's the old, which road do you take? Which path do you take? I've never been a conventional person, so I never was taking the road well traveled, if you will.
What is I guess, what's the most challenging thing? What's the hardest thing for you as a winemaker to deal with? Is it what nature throws at you every different vintage, every year that comes by? Is it the weather? Is it dealing with what's available as far as where you're sourcing your grapes from? What is the most challenging thing to deal with?
It's a good question because I don't know if I have one single answer.
What are your top three most challenging?
Well, when you're selling wine, you've got to be able to let people taste it.
Yeah.
Hopefully, your expression of what that grape gave you matches up with that person's expectations and their flavors and flavor points that they love. That's certainly difficult. I mean, I respect salespeople like crazy because if you can sell wine, hey, that's the name of the game, right?
Yeah. It's all about the dollar, right?
Well,
I mean, in some respects, you got to put food on your table.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I definitely treat this like a business. I guess for me personally, I'm definitely a numbers guy. I guess maybe that financial background and then the chemistry background. I like to see numbers. So I think everything's a challenge.
Yeah.
And I try to keep my eye on the ball on everything. What I'm best at is probably sales and talking with people. What I'm worst at that I put a lot of time and effort into it is the winemaking. So I think that's maybe why it shows differently in the bottles because I'm really focused on. You always want to work on your weaknesses, don't you?
Yeah.
I mean that's how I viewed life.
True.
I mean I didn't know how to sell either when I was a kid, and I get out of college and I find out that entrepreneurship, being a business owner, was what I wanted to do. And you have a product or a service that you have to move. Everything you do throughout life.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was, I better figure out how to do this. Because those are actually skill sets you don't get in college.
Right.
And I'm not down talking college, but I got out and I realized, whoa, I don't know anything.
Yeah.
Welcome
to the real world.
Yeah, welcome to the real world, Bart. Yeah. And here we go.
Yeah. So, I've been around enough to see that there's a lot of processes, perspectives in place in the wine industry, like we kind of alluded to in the last couple of questions, and some of them are just ingrained in people because that's the way it's always been done. Whatever. When it comes to wine glasses and tasting wine, the shape, the design of the wine glass. And the impact that it has on your sensory abilities, what are your thoughts on Riedel has this course, right, that they've done, that they bring it out to different tasting rooms, and they'll have an array of different glasses, and they'll pour the same wine in these glasses, and I haven't been part of one, but I've heard about them, I've read about them. Have you done any of those where you've actually looked at the construct of a wine glass and its impact on
I have not done that course, but I know what you're speaking.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that it's really, really important, or is that only important for people who are like sommeliers and whatever else let me masters of wine? Right.
An extremely controversial comment here.
Okay.
I look at it from the perspective that those wine glasses are my workhorses. Those are the things that are going to be one of the first things that somebody does or touches, sees, and uses in my tasting room, so it better be a good one. So if there's anything that I think is really interesting, is going to perhaps a winery that sells expensive wine, and their tasting room glasses are extremely cheap. What does that say about the winery?
Mason jars?
Right, I mean... Yeah,
right.
I mean,
yeah,
no offense to anybody who's using mason jars, but yeah, there's definitely. So anyway, we made it a conscious effort to put good glasses in our tasting room, and we get compliments on all that all the time. Now, whether there's a sensory perception difference between a really nice glass or not, it might be the overall feeling that most people are enjoying. A really nice stem is really fun.
Oh yeah,
and just the way it feels, the balance.
I don't like a stemless glass. Because I know physically I'm warming it up with my hand
True.
when I hold it.
I mean,
that's just one thing.
Yeah, I use stems almost exclusively. Obviously, around a pool or something like that's a little different. But even then, if I can get a stem, I'll put it in a holder that way. But other than that, I think the perception is nominal. And then, of course, just like wine, it's very subjective.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's very subjective.
Yep.
And that's why the whole thing about wine reviews, I mean, the only utility for me for wine reviewers when I look at, the Jeb Dunnocks and Robert Parkers and all these people out there is that when I tend to resonate with a specific reviewer of wines when they rank wines rather high and I've been able to taste those wines and I too really, really like those versus when they haven't ranked a wine high and I too wouldn't have really given it a second thought, then I'm kind of on the same wavelength with regard to their palate. That's all it says.
If that's true, to me. You're right.
Yeah, right. If it's true.
Controversial statement number 2 here.
Okay.
Is that really how they feel about the wine? How do we know?
Right. Are they being paid
it's possible
to do this? And sometimes they are and sometimes they're not, right?
I've heard rumors.
Yeah.
And are they living off of a reputation, the winemaker that is?
Right.
And does a reviewer now have certain expectations? Why, when a high-end reviewer comes to town, why do they only taste certain wineries' wines, not everybody's?
Right.
Why isn't that open to everybody?
Right.
Just a thought.
Mm-hmm. No, you're definitely onto something.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything. I have heard that, a nice steak dinner, a room,
well, yeah.
$10,000 worth of expenses.
Are they going to travel out to different wine regions on their own dime? I don't think so.
Sometimes it'll get you an extra 2 or 3 points, I've heard.
Right.
So
no, exactly.
I have no proof of that.
So, no.
And I'm not throwing anybody under the bus.
I understand, but it's a business. And anytime you put that word in there, it's a business.
Yep.
What comes into play? The dollar.
For sure.
So, we know we weren't born yesterday, right?
Yes.
So, okay, talking about food pairings, you've had a lot of experiences with a lot of different types of wines, a lot of different types of foods. But if you had to, say, okay, Aaron, I think that maybe one of the better wine pairings with food that I had was, give an example.
Yeah. So different categories of food is where it kind of comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
I love seafood, specifically oysters on the half shell. Give me a nice, bracy, acidic white wine. We do an Albarino, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I've not yet found a better pairing, maybe Sauv Blanc across the board, but love that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You think about where oysters come from, the ocean, working with wine regions that are closer to the ocean and the types of wines they make. For example, we do the Albarino, which I mentioned. It's a Spanish origin variety. What do Spaniards eat? Maybe a lot of seafood. I don't know. It seems like that it works really well. Olives, yeah. So Albarino,
Iberian ham.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So maybe I guess the saying is what grows together goes together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I when it comes to food pairings, I like that idea.
Your wines are great with food.
Oh, thank you.
I don't know if that was by design or not.
I think so.
But the wines that you craft always go really well with food, and in particular certain types of food.
I mean,
for me,
age-worthy wines that are big and bold and tannic and so forth like that. We do a few of those, sure. But then there's also stuff like Counoise. Like I said, we do Malvasia Bianca. We do different grape varieties that are lesser known, maybe esoteric, if you will. And we found that the food pairings with those are so much fun. It's just as diverse as the food. I want to have wines that match that.
right.
Yep.
So we talked about wine glasses. Another thing that people often do, or they talk about, is breathing a wine, decanting a wine. Now, I will say that my own personal perspective is that based on my experiences with wine, especially wines in our backyard, the bigger tannic wines from Red Mountain and, so forth, I have found in my experience that breathing and decanting a wine, aerating a wine and letting it decant, really, really, for me, helps my ability to sense what I want to sense, both aromatically and flavor profile-wise. And also, it makes the wine a lot more enjoyable for me than if I just crack it open, pour the glass, and dive right in. Now, that's just me. I can't speak for everybody. I have spoken to people who are in the wine industry and who have many years of wine experience, and they take the totally opposite stance. So again, it's another one of those political questions in the wine business. What are your thoughts on aeration and decanting?
Yeah, so as a winemaker, my job is to make a wine. So let's put it this way: wine is once it's fermented from the first day that it's finished fermenting, it's in a constant state of degradation at that point. So my job as the winemaker is to put it into vessels, barrels, tanks, and so forth, minimize its exposure to oxygen.
Oxygen, yeah.
Right, and in doing so, what I'm trying to do is give you the freshest wine possible in that bottle, especially when we release it early, right? Or when we release them, right? And so when you pop that cork, it's already in some sort of status, if you will, from point A to point B, B being all the way oxidized, somewhere in between there already. And so when you pop that cork, you're introducing oxygen again. And when you put it into a decanter, you're doing that at an accelerated rate rather than just popping a cork. And so at some point through tasting that bottle of wine, you're probably going to get its peak. So I think you can drink almost every new wine at its peak if you use a decanter or if you wait long enough. Question is how long do you need to wait?
And you can't know that. You cannot know that with all the parameters that go in, right? You can guess, but
I'm going to tell everybody to buy a case each of my varieties, and then they can do lots of experimentation.
There you go. But then by the time they buy the next case, things have changed.
True.
Right?
I mean, and the next vintage.
And the next vintage, exactly.
Yes.
So, yeah, but I mean, it's just a process. And the other thing is, what I like is I also like looking at the wine in a decanter. It's beautiful. The colors are beautiful for wines, and there's almost an ambiance that it creates when you have a decanter full of wine on your dinner table. I don't know.
And the older vintages, if there is some sediment in there, which is completely natural, by the way.
Yeah, it helps to settle it out.
Tartrates or tartaric acid that drops out over a period of time. You've got stuff that looks like coffee grounds on the bottom of your glass.
Yeah.
Just so you guys know, don't throw away the bottle because there's sediment.
No.
I've seen it and I've heard it.
Yeah, well, that's ignorance right there.
Well, hate to call people ignorant, but yes, absolutely.
I mean, if you're throwing away wine because it has sediment, that's a faux pas, major faux pas at Aaron's Wine Chronicles headquarters.
Especially if the winemaker is doing unfined and unfiltered wines. You're going to get that even more often, right?
That's right.
Depending on where you get that bottle from, let's face it, we put everything into a tank and we run it through a bottling line. Whether you get the stuff at the top of the tank or the bottom of the tank, you don't know. So there is possibility to have some of that. Now, most of us use sterile filtration these days. Yeah. And we also sterile filter at the bottling line. So a lot of times in the current New World wines, especially in our winery that we're making, you definitely should not have any sediment unless it was literally a chemical reaction in the bottle. And that's very possible.
Next question. Cork or screw top? And if it's cork, is it authentic cork or is it, the synthetic cork? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Or is it across the board? Depends, right? It depends on maybe what kind of wine you're fabricating, whether or not you want to just put a screw cap on it or cork it. Tell me, what are your thoughts?
Again, as a business owner and as somebody who's made wine a long enough time here, I think it comes down to the experience of the consumer. What do they want?
I'm old school. I like digging into a cork. It's part of the process. Sure. It's like a cigar. When Adam and I go out and smoke a cigar, we like taking the cigar, you smell it, you kind of feel it, make sure that it's not too soft or too brittle. You drill a hole through it. You punch a little hole in it so that you can draw better on it. You go outside and you sit down. There's a whole process, right? The same with a wine bottle when you open it up. For me, if I just have to pop it open or, like a Bud Light, maybe that's a bad choice of beers these days, but anyway.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the customer. I also get a lot of feedback that they wish that we had everything in screw caps because then it's really easy to get to. And also, if you don't finish the bottle, they can put the screw cap back on, put it in the fridge or whatever, and you say, "Oh, that's a major wine faux pas." Whatever, you've got to. That's what the customer wants and experiences. I personally would like to put everything under screw cap. It's more economical for the winery. It's maybe not as green and sustainable as a cork. What we currently put into our bottles are natural cork, but we use an agglomerated cork. So basically a cork that has been ripped apart into shreds. It's been sterilized and put back together and put into your bottle. So the experience you're getting from our bottles of wine are wines that are not corked, and that's really important.
And
so
then, of course, you don't risk the cork taint or the TCA, is that what it is?
That's what I mean by when I say corked.
Right.
Is that basically if somebody comes into the tasting room and I've proofed that bottle and made sure that it tastes and smells like it's supposed to, and then they take one home and it tastes horrible without the conscious understanding of what a corked or TCA tastes like, they may say, oh, this guy is doing the old bait and switch on me.
Exactly.
He probably poured me somebody else's wine because this is not what I remember and it's horrible.
Right.
But we don't want that experience.
Right.
So we switched over in our 2014 vintage to these new corks, and I've yet to have a corked bottle. So
awesome.
I think it's a great experience for the customer. So whether it's that cork or the screw cap, I'm totally down for that again because I don't want people coming back into my tasting room mad that their bottle didn't taste good.
Right. So, what makes Bartholomew Winery special in your mind? And I know you're biased because it's your baby. It's your name.
Sure. I think we hit on it a little bit earlier. I think I don't have too many preconceived biases as what wine is or how to make it or what it should be. I think I try to think outside the box, give people different options, not only on the varieties, but maybe perhaps the way we made it. For example, I mentioned Counoise earlier. We do a nice light-bodied red wine called Counoise. It's French in origin. And basically 6 months in neutral oak barrels, so oak barrels that don't have any flavor left in them, put it right into a bottle, and then the bottle aging happens, and that's where the magic is. Yeah. And we can release a red wine in under a year by doing that. So economically, it works great for me, logistically as well, and or on logistics. And then there's a lot of maintenance that goes into barrel work throughout the year. So if you get into a bottle earlier, that's a little less on your overhead. And then you have to ask yourself, why would you want to age it longer? And what are the effects of aging? Is it going to make a big difference in the flavor of the wine? And if there's no oak, or if it's an oak profile that is a neutral barrel, is it important to leave it in there longer if you're not having any barrel influence? So those are kinds of questions that I ask.
And that's a good segue into it. Not this next question, but the one right after, talking about cooperages and barrel programs and that kind of thing. But so I both Adam and I are longtime fans of your wine, and what I personally am always impressed by is the diversity of the wines that you craft. You're not a large production winery. You're not putting out 40,000 cases of wine a year, right?
3,000.
Yeah, exactly. 3,000, okay? So that's a small production winery. But what really sets you apart, I think, is the quality. And on top of that, there's another factor, the price that you charge for your wines. So you have a very high quality to price ratio with your wines. And I've always been impressed with that because I've been to a number of wineries that have started out that way, and they've really made a good impact. They dig their fingers in and they get a nice following, and then very rapidly you'll start seeing the prices start to increase. And as that happens, oftentimes what I've noticed is that the quality doesn't increase appropriately with the rate of the price increases, right? And so at some point it becomes kind of a losing for the consumer. Okay, so at some point, where does that bubble burst? But I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about how you get that high quality to price ratio, and what are your thoughts on like old world philosophy winemaking, from France or whatever, Italy, where they've been doing this for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years, whatever, versus kind of the new world approach to winemaking, and what you think about those two approaches?
Well, there's a lot. So let me see.
There's a lot there.
If I can unpack that.
Right.
So price for me, I really approach it from the consumer standpoint. What would I want to pay for that bottle? And I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. So what can the average person afford? Or where do they feel like this works? Two, I also want them to feel like if wine's an experience, and it should be a good experience, not a bad experience, they should be happy to open that bottle. And even though maybe some of our stuff's in the 20 to 40 range, I still want them to be able to do that happily. And when they have a friend or family or a special occasion, or even just on a Wednesday night, they want to pop open that bottle, they should feel good about it.
Instead of being reluctant because it cost $180 for the bottle and they're like, I want to save this for this or whatever, right? I mean, yeah, I get you. I hear you.
And this leads into another segue, controversial statement number 3 here. Buy what you like, and if it's not worth it, don't buy it. And just because it's expensive doesn't mean it's better.
Right.
So there's a lot that goes into marketing. There's a lot that goes into scores and magazines
exactly
and so forth.
Right. But that's what people have to experience that on their own. I didn't learn that the first year, 2, 3, 4 that I was getting into wines.
Now you're hitting it right on the head, because a lot of people don't know
what they like
enough about wine
or
yet.
what they like. Yeah.
When I say yet, they're in that discovery phase. But when they figure it out, that's why I think, I don't know, I just paying too much for a bottle of wine is, just think about all the overhead that the winery has, think about all the people and so forth. So you're paying for that. So that's worth it. That makes it a business decision. But at the same time, could the winemaker or the winery or the salesperson sell it for less money? I guess my philosophy is I would like to actually make more wine than I am now. There's a lot of other varieties that I'd like to work with that I can't afford to do yet. So I make enough to where I can sell. So I guess the bottom line for me doing something like this is if I can sell more wine down the road, then I'll make more wine. But I think my philosophy is to keep the price points similar or the same. Now, obviously, our costs are going up. We all have experienced that since 2020, right? There's a lot of stuff that happened in the world. And if there's anything, reason why I should increase those is because of that. I mean, obviously, labor, all those things make a difference. My grape costs are going sky high right now. Yeah. Bottle costs are going up. Everything is double or triple. So how's your margin? Do you want bigger margins, smaller margins? As a business owner, you always want big margins, but where is the right number?
Right.
So again, I try to approach it from kind of looking at the math and economics, but at the same time, I look at it as a consumer and say, gosh, I mean, this bottle is no better, or it is better than the last one that I had. So why is there a $20 difference?
Well, I guarantee you that if you put blindfolds on people and you put your wine side by side with most wines across the Northwest, or especially in Eastern Washington, whatever, that's where all the wine's made anyway.
Yeah.
They sell it in Woodinville, but it's all comes from our backyard.
The grapes are grown here, yes.
Yeah. I will tell you that, your wines are pound for pound some of the best out there, period. Don't even look at price. But when you look at the price, you'll be really, really pleased. And I don't know how long you can or will sustain that, but whatever you're doing it right, because across the board, for the audience who has not tasted Bartholomew Winery wines, I would say across the board, you're going to be tasting wines that drink like a typical $80 to $120 bottle, but they're not anywhere near that price. That's what I'm talking about, high quality to price ratio.
Thank you.
And I've done a lot of tasting. My last name is not Dunnick or Parker, but I've been to a lot of different tasting rooms over the years, and so has my brother, and we make it a point to taste a lot of wines. And from a personal perspective, I can say that what I just said about your wines is 100% true. Wow. And people have to experience that themselves, though. You can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink, right?
Yeah, but if they're going to the water, the website is bartholomewwinery.com.
There you go.
Just kidding. But thank you very much for that.
It's just the truth. That's part of the reason why my brother and I have gravitated toward your wines for many years.
Yeah, part of growing up in the sales industry, too, you always want to over-deliver.
Yeah.
You don't want to over-promise.
Right.
And so that's what we try to do every year. At the same time, I realize that there is vintage variation. Gosh, I'll tell you, sometimes I want to drop the prices on my wine because I feel like, it wasn't as good as last year's or whatever. And I'm hypercritical.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, I have this reputation to uphold based on this price point, so it should be that good or better every year. Well, it doesn't always happen, right? Mother Nature has different things sometimes. So there are vintages that I would prefer over others and stuff. And so, that's the hard part. So I always try to price it to where I'm not going too high.
I wouldn't beat yourself up too much, Bart.
Oh,
I would just tell people, hey, if you don't like it, go pay 3 or 4 times as much for a wine that's equal to or slightly less than what you're drinking right now, and they won't be able to find it. But
Well, and then come back next year and try the next vintage.
That's right. That's right. Just tell them to stop whining. So, do you have any favorite cooperages that you like to deal with when you purchase your barrels and you develop your aging programs in barrel? Do you have that in and of itself to me is a science?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of trial and error in the barrel industry. The variations in barrel is almost as vast as the variation in winemaking. And what I mean by that is, especially if it's a cooper or a wine barrel manufacturer that's maybe old school, they have, say, 10 barrel makers working every day, and they put it over fire, open flames,
right,
and they have a feel for it.
Toasting it, right?
Toasting those barrels.
Yeah.
Now, how scientific is that?
Right.
I mean, is it the exact temperature and the exact amount of time on every single barrel? So not even. Even if you order the same barrels across the board, there's going to be some variation. That's just the science. It's going to be different across the board. So my philosophy on wine barrels is that it's almost like when you're making a great meal, you need to season your wine, or not your wine, your food properly. So salt and pepper, let's just use those as examples. That's what most people use on their food. So some food requires more salt and pepper, some less. I look at the varieties that we make, and we kind of figure that out too. So when you're trying to make wine on purpose, which is what we try to do, you figure out how much salt and pepper you want to have, because you either can't take salt out, or you added too much, or you're too peppery, or whatever. And some varieties they soak up wood, as we say, a lot more than others. So those flavors. And then the other part is which flavored point do you want? After doing a lot of these trials with many, many different winemakers across Washington State, and all the coopers who sponsor all these events that we do, you get a great chance to taste what those barrels taste like, at least from that winemaker, that variety, and so forth. So it helps just with that whole sensorial kind of idea of what we want to do. Now, what we found is we do a lot of Carmenere. About a third of our production, almost 1,000 cases a year now, is Carmenere.
Yeah, and it's great.
Thank you.
Love your Carmenere.
Thank you. And so we found that the American oak profile, the vanillins, the whiskey lactones, the coconuts, and some of those things really pair really well with the spicy, peppery, bell peppery kind of flavor points that come into that wine, and it's a match made in heaven, in my opinion. And then we've gone to the extent of realizing that there's a country south of the border called Chile that does a lot of Carmenere. Right. And I found a cooper that toasts their barrel specifically for Chilean Carmenere. Yeah. And we've incorporated that into our vintages over the last couple of years to try to see if we can just add just that one little...
Research pays off.
Yeah, 2, 3, 4, 5% difference from anybody else based on your barrel choices might be the difference between them buying that bottle or not. And that's really important to me. We want them to all buy.
Cool.
Yeah.
So coming kind of full circle now, what would people be surprised to know about you that they don't already know? Maybe say your club members who have had a chance to chat with you off and on over the years. What is something you could pull out of your back pocket that would surprise them about you?
Well, just like a wine ages really well, and you get the finished product, and it's amazing. What you're looking at now is a more refined finished product. I've not always been this way, right? We all start out much rougher. Yeah. In fact, I started another winery before this with a partner that failed miserably.
Really? That's news to me. I never heard that.
I don't think I've ever said it publicly.
Wow.
So you're first.
Right. Crazy.
Controversial statement number 5 or 4 or whatever. Yeah. It was a partnership that it didn't work. I caught my partner stealing from me.
No.
And there's only a few things that are going to
Was that the guy they never found? Yeah. The body was never
Don't
located?
Say that. No, as far as I know,
that's just an anomalous experience that you had. I mean,
sure, but at the time I didn't know exactly everything, and I didn't want to give up on this dream that I had created.
Right.
And so we just started over. And so I would guess my best characteristic is maybe perhaps tenacity. I'm just not willing to give up. So if I get something started, I'm going to give 100%, And if it fails, I'm actually okay with that.
Okay.
And I think that's where a lot of people maybe don't realize when you get to the crest of doing something that people regard as quality, they may not know how much time and effort and quantity it took into getting all of that to point B, which is whatever definition of success you have.
And if you weren't making wine, what would you be doing right now?
Probably starting other businesses. In fact, I still am. So I love to invest in new companies. I like real estate. I like money. I don't want to be stuck with just one thing in my life. I guess maybe it's the undiagnosed ADHD or something of that nature, but I'm constantly working towards something, always, just moving forward, falling forward, failing forward, or succeeding, and I never rest on my laurels. So that's probably something that most people don't know. But if you come into my tasting room and you want to talk that talk with me, talk shop, man, be prepared to stay there for an hour because I'll talk with you.
I have noticed that. Your people skills, your hospitality for the guy.
Oh, thank you.
Right? You very often will come and sit right at the tip. You did it the other day when Adam and I came in with Adam's wife, and he was there to pick up his shipment, but you sat down, you even opened up a bottle, and you brought it and cracked it open and gave us taste of wine. And you sat there and engaged us, and you had other people, you had things going on in the facility, and that's admirable because a lot of times people either won't make that effort to sit down with customers and engage them, or they're just too busy or whatever. They don't value it. I don't know. But
yeah, another controversial statement. Wherever we're at here, winemakers should be in their tasting rooms on occasion and get the direct feedback from the customer base.
I agree.
Watch their facial expressions, see what they want to, quote, revisit. And then finally, what are they laying their dollars down for? Because that's the ultimate. So I've been more influenced by my customers than maybe anything else. And I think maybe that's why our wines taste the way they do, our price points. And then, it's hard to, if you're sitting down talking with somebody, engaging with them, and you get to know them pretty well, and they buy wine, it's hard not to do that again, right? That's the way I look at it. I really want to be there and do whatever I can. I can't do that for the rest of my life, but as much as I can, I try to be there, and you guys come into my tasting room and get to know me. I'll get to know you. I may not remember your name every time or whatever, but it helps. It helps us a lot, and that's how we've been able to basically survive, not only making good wine, but without having any scores or any of the other third-party marketing done for us. We've been able to sell out every year and grow from 500-600 cases to 3,000 cases, just keeping everything real tight.
I mean, with 16 vintages under your belt now, you're quickly becoming a pillar of excellent winemaking. And I guess my question is, as you look, I know you're not Nostradamus, but as you look into the future for the Washington wine industry, what do you think is the biggest challenge on the horizon for Northwest wine?
There's going to be maybe some economic pressures. Those are completely out of our control. Inflationary type situations and so forth. Like I said, I look at the market all the time, and maybe that's why I think that way. And then the other part is wineries sometimes, again, controversial statement number 6 or 7 here, is they create hurdles or barriers to enjoyment of wine. And I'm seeing that, especially after the COVID years, is that now there's going to be some people who don't want to come in and engage and have conversations and want me to sit down next to them and have a conversation. That's fine.
Right.
Body language tells me a lot, so I won't do that. But I've realized that there's a lot of wineries that have just disengaged, and through whatever types of tasting arrangements that they've done, not to mention even just the expenditure. If you and your wife, or you and your spouse, it's just wife in my case, if you and your spouse go into a tasting and each one of you is paying $45 to taste, you're $90 in, and I don't know if there's any money left to have a bottle. So do you want to make all your money on tasting fees? Yeah. Or do you want to get rid of the inventory that you've built up?
It actually becomes a filter. Basically, they're filtering a lot of people out.
Yeah. So I kind of joke with my employees. I tell them that we're not the DMV. So people are excited to be here and they want to come in and taste. So let's give them that experience.
Right.
Let's eliminate hurdles. So if somebody comes in and says, what do I have to do to get, what's your tasting fee? And I was like, whoa, hold on, just chill. I've got like 8 bottles open here. Let's taste through those. You can say no to anything. Hopefully you find something you like. And if you don't, that's okay. I'm not going to make you buy anything. We're pretty confident in our wine. And in fact, I'll make this comment public here. If I'm there and you don't like the wine and you don't like the tasting or you didn't have a good time, please don't pay a tasting fee. Because
kind of like Les Schwab. If we can't guarantee it, we won't sell it.
Well, I just don't want you to have a bad experience.
Yeah.
And then have to pay for it.
Right.
And then especially I don't want you to go on and do a review. That,
Right,
we had a horrible
Right.
experience.
I'll put it out on Yelp or whatever, and
Right,
all of a sudden, 1 star. Yeah.
Yeah. Because anyway, that's the kind of my personal guarantee, and we try to live by that. And we have a really high closing rate. We hardly ever charge a tasting fee. Most people find something in their price range. We start at, I think, $18 and work up to upper 30s, and that's it, So, yeah. And then we have 20 varieties to try.
I know.
Not all at the same time. We
the
have a lot of
spectrum of
different
wines that you put out is just for how many cases you're producing a year. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, a lot of small quantity stuff.
Yeah. So, last question for you. What are you looking forward to most in the next vintage?
The one I'm going to release, or the harvest that's coming?
The harvest that's coming.
Oh, okay. What am I looking forward to? Continuing on with what we've started.
Do you have any new varietals that you're going to break out on us? Because you're one of those winemakers that utilizes grapes that people can't spell, they've never heard of, and you create fabulous wines from them.
Yeah, I just signed a new contract for a grape I've never used, and to be honest with you, I've never even had a bottle, so I'm looking forward to researching this over the next couple of months. And it's a grape called Nero Diavola. That's I guess it's Sicilian in origination, so southern part of Italy. And from my initial research online, it looks like it can be made in 20 different styles.
Oh,
so
man.
I got to go try them and find out. I've heard anything it tastes like a Cab Sauv to when I was looking at some of the techniques of how they were making it, they were doing a stainless steel, very little aging, lower, lighter body. So this is going to be fun because we don't know what we're going to get until it comes into the house, and then we have to make some decisions on the fly and find that out. And then we don't know like tannin extraction, color, and so forth until we get halfway through or mostly through the fermentation. And then we don't know the way it's going to taste with oak and so forth. So it's fun for us because it gives us something new. And then I always tease all of my customers, we just brought this in, but you have to wait 3 or 4 years to taste it.
Yeah,
But
right.
it's a lot of fun. So what we just bottled up was something new. We just did another Italian variety called Negro Amaro. I did not know what to expect on that. I heard it was something you blend with maybe Primitivo in the Puglia region, which we do Primitivo. I thought, okay, well, at least if it doesn't taste good, we can blend it with a nice fruity, fruit-forward red wine. Anyway, it tasted amazing on its own. So we just put that in a bottle in January. So we're looking forward to releasing that sometime this year.
Nice.
We've got Carmenere from 5 or 6 different vineyards now out of 4 different Washington AVAs. We just had another 3 acres planted for us a couple Mondays ago, so we'll see that happening. That'll be our 5th Washington AVA of Carmenere. So yeah, just having fun with all the varieties and giving people different flavors. So when they come in, we would just really want to just take them on a tour of their taste buds, going from different whites to lighter body reds to heavy body reds. Yep.
Well, for the audience, for those in the audience who are going to tune into the YouTube video version of the podcast, why don't you show a couple of bottles with your label on it so that people know what to see when they're out and about, or when they get out there and they want to purchase some wine online, they'll be able to recognize your bottles.
Absolutely. So hopefully you can see this. This is a white wine grape called Malvasia Bianca. Some people call it Malvasia. I'm not sure exactly where to put all the accents. Sometimes I put the accent on the emphasis on the wrong syllable. But this is a nice stainless steel aged wine that is fermented all the way to dryness, meaning that there's no residual sugar left in that. and we started making it with one barrel that we were able to find 3 years ago. Now we're up to a couple pallets. We found another vineyard that has it, and other people are starting to plant some things like that.
Cool.
That's a lot of fun. It goes fast though, out of our tasting room. The other thing that we're really known for, and I've hinted on that, is Carmenere. So
Right.
what we've got now is a new Red Mountain Carmenere that we just released. This is our 2020 vintage.
What vineyard do you get it from?
This is from Heart of the Hill Vineyard
Heart of the
over
Hill.
on Red
Okay.
Mountain.
Right.
And that wine there, we try to extract as much as we can on that one. What I mean by that is it's already a really dark color, but we want to pull out all that peppery goodness. We want some tannins in there. We put a lot of new oak, and some of those barrels that we've mentioned before is toasted specifically for Carmenere. And so we're just trying to create that experience with our Red Mountain Carmenere. At $37 retail, that's our high end of our tasting. We found that that's pretty reasonable compared to the other Carmeneres that are out there.
You got it.
Yep. And then flavor-wise, it's fun. We, myself and my assistant winemaker, we typically try to pull every Washington Carmenere that we can find from that vintage. And at the end of the year, we do a big tasting. We open up everybody's bottles. A lot of times we invite friends and family over and say, here, just taste through these. And me as a winemaker, I'm really open-minded on this. I say, if you don't like mine, why? And if somebody else's tastes better in your opinion, please explain to me what I could have done differently.
Right.
So we try not to manipulate too much, but there are things that you can do in winemaking to always make your wine better.
Cool. Man, that's awesome.
Thanks.
Bart, I have to say, I've learned a lot today. I'm sure our audience has learned a lot today about you, your winemaking approach, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to host you today. Before we go, I'd like you to kind of remind our audience again, give them the lowdown on Bartholomew Winery so that they know where to go to get the highest quality wines at the best prices.
Yeah, BartholomewWinery.com. We're in Kennewick, Washington, so Southeast Washington. You can look at, we're also referred to as the Tri-Cities in Southeast Washington. Online, outside of BartholomewWinery.com, we don't do a lot of social media, but what we do a lot of times is at Bartwines, BartWines. And so you can find us there, like on Facebook and stuff like that. But again, go to our website, check out our what do you want to call our shopping list there, and find out if there's something that interests you. And again, we put a guarantee on everything. So if you get something you don't like it, I'll replace it with something else.
Who does that?
I mean, I don't know.
Really?
I just feel like everybody should enjoy the wine
They
that
should.
they're drinking. Absolutely.
Thank you again, Bart.
You're welcome.
It's been great. Thanks for joining us on Live the Good Life. And that's all we have for today's episode. Again, for more of Living the Good Life, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Aaron's Wine Chronicles, or you can go online at aaronswinechronicles.com. For the video podcast version of this episode, visit my YouTube channel at the @ Aaron's Wine Chronicles 6666. Our next episode, I'm going to be interviewing a guy named Bryce Appleby. Bryce really personifies the good life, and when you get a chance to meet him, you'll understand why. Bryce is the tasting room manager at Fidelitas Winery on Red Mountain in Benton City. He's also a family man, a stellar musician, an amazing chef, and one of the best people you could ever meet. And while Bryce may not yet know this, he is also a Hall of Fame inductee to the Live the Good Life Ring of Honor here at Aaron's Wine Chronicles. So stay tuned for that. We're going to have a great time chatting with Bryce. Thank you all for listening. And remember, wherever you go, whenever you can, always live the good life. Until next time.